Good evening. I'm Paul Fredette, and with me is my wife, Karen. Together, Karen and I minister to hermits and to religious solitaries throughout the world through Ravensbread Ministries, right here from our home in the mountains of western North Carolina. We want to take this opportunity at the outset to welcome that whole circle of people who have been following us through these presentations for the last couple of months, soon becoming very good friends, and to any of you who might be joining us for the first time this evening, welcome.
Welcome.
In these presentations, we've been sharing the insights and reflections that Karen and I have experienced over the past 17 years following the reawakening, the resurgence, reemergence of hermit life, especially in the Western world, particularly in English-speaking countries, but in many others as well, as hermits that we've corresponded with extensively have shared their thoughts and reflections about the essential features of eremitic life, about the profile and the prerequisites and the helps and the hazards, about things like mindfulness and stability, about varying degrees of life in solitude, about silence, all these things that many of them we've touched on in the past few months, and they continue to direct our thoughts and our minds to the holy, to the presence of God, to the life of the Spirit. Tonight, we'd like to redirect things a little bit, since even though hermits and many of these considerations about hermit life can place and move our head towards the clouds, nevertheless, our feet have to remain firmly planted on the ground. And so tonight, at the risk of possibly disappointing some of you, we'd like to spend some time in practical considerations, which we have learned and have been the fruit of our work over the last 17 years. There is an interesting story that the early Desert Fathers had that more or less illustrates this particular point, direction that we'd like to travel in with you this evening. It seemed that a brother came and questioned Abba Motius, saying to him,
If I go to dwell somewhere, how do you want me to live?
Well, if you live somewhere, he said, do not seek to be known as anything special.
Well, then what shall I do?
Wherever you live, follow the same manner of life as everyone else. And if you see devout people whom you trust doing something, do the same, and you'll be at peace. For this is humility, to see yourself to be the same as the rest. When people see you, do not go beyond the limits. They will consider you to be the same as everyone else, and no one will trouble you. Actually, the practical realities of setting out to live as a solitary are very similar to ones we encounter if we were to move to a foreign country. We have to consider when. Is now the time? Is it possible? Is it appropriate? We have to consider very real considerations like, what about existing social obligations? What of our involvement, if any, currently in our local communities? not to say, what about our responsibilities, if any, to family members, near or far? At this time, maybe the answer to those questions will lead us to see that we might have to put off such a decision. Certainly, we'd have to prepare to bring many of these relationships to a close. Then the where is a very big consideration. Where to go? What is possible? Even if something is attractive, doesn't really mean it's doable. And then there's the how. What are the first steps? How do I go about this? How do I make the initial preparations? What are many of the things that need to be put in order before I do something like this? Have I considered all my health considerations? How about my financial obligations and things like that?
Practical things like
Practical things like that. Inevitably, of course, there's the why, for which there's no entirely reasonable explanation. But what am I setting out to do?
Yes.
Basically, nothing. It is nothing unusual. And this particular statement is exactly word for word the one which the author in this latest issue of the Saturday Evening Post quoted the book, Consider the Ravens. Invite you to find it online if you'd like, or to pick it up in your local newsstand if that's a possibility for you. It's a wonderful, very succinct, not very long, but wonderful article entitled Urban Hermits. Basically, hermits live very ordinary lives, even though they live them for out of an extraordinary motivation. We've talked before mainly about in a very spiritual way about the when. Well, the when is when the person decides to stop being pursued by this relentless lover in the holy. When they finally give in and allow themselves to be caught in that mysterious embrace. That's the when. And the where? Well, on the spiritual level, the where is the same. The where is wherever you can be together with this relentless lover. There's your hermitage. On the other hand, hermits are not angels. And the poetry and the ecstasy can't entirely make up for the practical considerations. We live in the earth. We have bodies and bodily needs, and even the Desert Fathers were aware that continually aspiring hermits had to be called back to earth. And some of them did it in very interesting ways. One of the best illustrations goes like this, and the circumstance is a hermit community, or Laura, as it was called. It seems that a brother came to visit Abba Sylvanus at Mount Sinai, probably even before the great monastery of St. Catherine was ever established. And when he saw all the brothers working very hard, he said to the old man,
"Do not work for the food that perishes. Mary has chosen the good part."
The old man called his disciple Zachary and said, "Give this brother a book and put him in one of the empty cells." Now, when it got along to be about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the brother kept looking out the door to see whether someone would come and call him for a meal. But nobody called him. So eventually he got up and he went to see the old man.
Abba, didn't your brothers eat today?
Well, of course they did.
Well, why didn't you call me?
You are a spiritual person, and so you do not need that kind of food. We are earthly. We want to eat, and that's why we work.
Oh. When it comes to practicalities, one of the first things we have to consider is hermitages. And they can run the gamut from caves to condos. There is no parameters. There is no model hermitage that you can send away for. Although there used to be some in England, I understand. They had models for sale. But it is prudent for any aspiring hermit to take into account not only their personal attractions when they're considering where and how to build a hermit or find a hermitage, but also their needs and their abilities. They all come into play here. A person can feel very attracted to living in the woods or on a desert island where they won't be interrupted in their prayers, or they could dream of living on a mountain slope where they don't see anyone from day to day.
They shouldn't make the mistake of trying to live on a pillar, though.
No, we find very few perching on pillars these days. But, you know, when choosing a hermitage, we have to consider not only our natural attractions, but also how strong are we? What are our abilities? Are we able to keep up a hermitage entirely on our own without any outward assistance? I know that I was very grateful in the first hermitage that I lived in that there was father and son who lived up on the ridge, Ronnie and Sonny, who I could call on when my pump froze up or my electricity went out. We all have to consider some people want to be far away from others, and they can do it. They have the abilities they have. Others will live as hidden hermits in plain sight, in an apartment building or in a suburban neighborhood where no one around them really knows the intense prayer life that is being lived out so near at hand.
One word of caution to all who might be listening: no matter how much you may admire Julian of Norwich, Karen and I would suggest that you don't try to approach a bishop about establishing an anchor hold adjoining or attached to their cathedral. It's not going to go over. You may as well just not even go there.
Right. So a hidden hermit can be living in plain sight, melding into his surroundings because he isn't doing anything outwardly different, as Abba Mosius recommended at the beginning of our talk this evening. As an aside, there are some hermits who have considered and gone into a foreign country to experience the social isolation that comes from living where you don't know the language very well. Or occasionally a man or woman, especially from the Western world, will want to try living on in India, they might join an ashram for a few years to experience the depth of spirituality they find there. Others have lived for a few years with the monks in Tibet, where they have been able to find out how to go into the spiritual calling in a way that's perhaps impossible in any other situation. But most of these end up by coming back to their country of origin and looking for a place to live out their new gifts and calling. And one of the things that is important is that they look for a place where they can be stable. And I'm not talking about the building itself, but the stability of staying in one place, where there are benefits to be reaped by acquiring that settled depth where our roots can reach and wrap around the rock, capital R, that will hold us steady through all the storms that may come our way. When we are considering hermit life and a hermitage, ownership comes into the topic, because very few of us have a building or a house suddenly given to us for free. If we are already a professed religious, ownership is out of the question, because your vow of poverty prevents ownership. Therefore, your community will ordinarily provide for you. But in our modern culture, most hermits are seculars, and the best way to guarantee stability is to own the deed to your hermitage, whether it is on a tract in the forest or a condo in the city. More than once, hermits have contacted us in dismay because an apartment they were renting for many years, they have to leave because the owner of the building has either decided to tear it down or is raising the rent to such a height that they can no longer afford to live there.
Right.
A small group of hermits we know who were given a lifetime a lease to a large wooded property were dismayed when the owners of the property informed them that they needed to timber it in order to make the money from the wood that they would, which almost effectively did away with the privacy and solitude that they were enjoying and so valued. Hermits who make a profession to a bishop in a diocese should not expect that the bishop is going to turn around and give them a tract of land and enough money to build a hermitage. That is extremely unlikely. It has been heard of, but under ordinary circumstances, it is not to be expected. It is very rare. Hermits living together in a group, which we call a hermit lora, may own property in common, but that too has its problems, particularly if one or other of the members of the lora decide to leave. So then there's the question of reimbursing them their part of the ownership. Ideally, each hermit should be financially responsible for their own living circumstances. They may live in close community with the others, but they are financially responsible for themselves and for the property on which they are living. Because we have found and seen, sadly enough, that if one person, perhaps no matter how trustworthy, is given control of the purse strings, they will then have an undue influence on what happens in the over the life of the group. In one situation, one of the sisters living on the property belonged to a religious community, and when her mother died, she left her an inheritance, which the community allowed her to use to buy the property she was sharing with another woman who was a secular religious and was not bound by the vow of poverty and inability of ownership. sadly, they came to a point where their differences were just irreconcilable, and one of them had to leave. And the person in whose name the property was registered simply said to the other, "You're the one that has to leave." That's an example of an injustice which unfortunately does happen from time to time. Another question which needs attention when you're considering a hermitage is where it's the type of dwelling it's going to be. You know where, you know how it's going to be administered. What type of dwelling do you want? As Paul said, you're not going to be allowed to have an anchor hold. And we have already noted the ingenuity of some hermits who have been able to build their own hermitage according to their own desires.
But this is again a consideration where many people spend some time in solitude for a retreat, perhaps a few days, perhaps a few weeks, perhaps even a few months. Well, a single room with a bed and a wash basin is perhaps adequate for a retreat. But when you really seriously consider the remainder of one's life, this is another story. We need to look at all of the rest of the things that are involved, don't we, Karen?
Yes, I mean, if you're going to be cooking your own food all the time, if you're going to be having a prayer space that is set up solely for that purpose, if you are going to be earning your own living out of your own hermitage, you're going to need space. And just psychologically, living in one small cell is very difficult. We must say that we highly admire the number of our readers who are, not by choice, living in one small cell as guests of the vast correctional system that our country has. And they have been able to, though without exercising much control over their outer circumstances,
they've been ingenious.
They have been ingenious in how they have made their cell a place of refuge and prayer, and have been transforming, if not their outer worlds, their inner worlds.
Exactly.
A final point about hermitages itself is that, as we have mentioned, they need to be a place where, as far as you know, you will be able to stay.
This is the practical side of that whole question of stability that we talked about a few weeks ago, and the ability to really stay put and simply be there.
The Desert Fathers have a saying, which is, like all of their sayings, worth remembering and has been remembered. They say, just as a tree cannot bear fruit if it is continually transplanted, so neither can the hermit bear fruit if he is frequently changing his abode. The type of eremitical life that one plans to live determines what will be included and what will be excluded from your hermitage. There are people who have very romantic and heroic ideas of what a hermitage should be, considering that it would be ideal to rough it without any of the modern conveniences. And they become almost seduced by this romantic image, and they determine to live as simply as possible, that is, without indoor plumbing, without electricity, without any other concessions to the 21st century. However, most of them quickly learn that such a choice makes their daily life far from simple. Water must be obtained and heated daily Wood must be cut, stacked, dried, burned, and tended continually, especially during the colder months. Their oil lamps need to be cleaned and refilled, or their eyes will be under severe strain, or there'll be no light. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, they all become almost Herculean tasks under these circumstances. How can one find time for restful contemplative prayer? How can even one do Lectio Divina or read the Holy Office if they do not have enough light or their eyes are severely strained? A primitive lifestyle and a contemplative rhythm can prove to be mutually exclusive. It is even though one may be physically able to meet these demands, the simple life and the primitive life are not synonymous. When I lived as a hermit, I was surprised to learn that people expected me to be growing my own food. I had grown up in a family that had a big garden, and I looked at my neighbors down the road and saw the big tool shed they had, which was filled to capacity with all kinds of tools, some of which required gasoline, oil, and constant maintenance. They were also expensive. Even a wheelbarrow can cost up to $70. I watched them as in the springtime they bought their starter plants or seeds, which they had to take care of under hot frames, or what they called cold frames, for reasons I didn't understand, and then transplanted them into their regular garden when they were sturdy enough. And then came the mulching, the fertilizing, the pest control. I watched one neighbor put up a fence 9 feet high in order to keep out the deer and other animals that were sure to eat more of their garden than they were willing to share. So I, as well as other hermits, drew the conclusion that I would buy my vegetables and my fruits at the supermarket, and my health would not suffer even if my image did suffer a little. Yes.
Speaking of images, many of you viewing this may have a few years ago seen that starkly beautiful documentary filmed at the Grand Chartreuse. The name of the documentary was Into Great Silence, the life of the monks there. And you may have noted that while some of the monks lived there as total recluses, there were also lay brothers who daily delivered hot meals and clean laundry to the quarters of their enclosed brethren. They had electricity, they had running water, and there were useful tools when it was needed, like laptops even. True, many of the monks got some healthy exercise by chopping wood for the small stoves that were in their enclosures, but there were also many monks who, due to age or some form of disability, this was not possible, so they were furnished with radiators. So it's clear that it was clear to the viewers of the film that the primary reason for these monks living in almost total solitude was to have time for prayer. Hours and hours of prayer, undisturbed by the many household tasks attended to by the lay brothers. Now, when you consider that many of the hermits that we're in touch with and they're people who live on their own, they're not equipped like the monks of the great Chartreuse. they don't have the benefits of these kinds of personal services. So most of them make use of modern conveniences that allow them to have a daily quiet rhythm for prayer and reflection. When the questions of the site and the type of dwelling for the hermitage have been taken care of, then comes the whole question of how to adequately and effectively furnish a household like this.
Mm-hmm.
The appointments for a hermitage normally are modest ones, but they don't have to be uncomfortable or ugly. Most of the people that we've been in touch with are at midlife or even older. And once you get to midlife, you definitely appreciate at least one upholstered chair
Yes.
or a rocker in which to rest, to reflect, to pray,
To relax.
to relax. One's kitchen has to be equipped with a variety of pots and pans and utensils that are needed for even the simplest of meal preparations.
I remember how shocked one of my neighbors was when she walked in and saw a, God forbid, microwave.
A microwave in a Hermit's kitchen.
My goodness, yes. Someone had given me a microwave. They were buying a larger one, and they thought I could make good use of it, which, frankly, I did.
Well, we know for certain that there are hermitages not only with microwaves, but with electric mixers and with bread makers and whatever else helps to make the daily chores go a little bit more quickly and a little bit less challenging so that more time can be available for prayer and for reflection and study. Household appliances like a dishwasher may definitely be out of place and entirely unnecessary when one person is in the household. But the same can't be said for a clothes washer. How many of us in and out of season really want to be washing our clothes in the nearest creek bed?
Or just on a scrubbing board.
Or on a scrubbing board in a tub. And the same with a clothes dryer, and in terms of cleaning, the same with a vacuum cleaner. It just may be that with overall health, sanitation, allergies, and everything else, that a vacuum cleaner is the best way to maintain the interior of the hermitage. We may wonder sometimes why all this attention to these mundane questions. Because for many people, modern appliances just don't fit in their image of a real hermit. But more often than not, visitors do express surprise at this, but it has more to do with image and stereotype than it does with reality.
Yes.
I remember chuckling as Karen recounted a radio interview that she did just a few short years ago, in which the host of the radio interview was waxing eloquently about hermits and
the simple life,
and made the bald statement that certainly a hermit wouldn't even know about an espresso machine, let alone have one. Karen said that it was a good thing it was a radio interview, since she really had to suppress her smiles and not ruin the host's storyline.
Yeah. Many hermits will agree that when it comes to furnishing your hermitage, you plan, the ideal thing to plan is to work within your hermitage and not to have to go out. And that brings up another question. You need space if you're going. You can't just work at anything, pick it up, put it away, bring it back out.
Mm-hmm.
You need a room, a studio, a place, an adequate place to store things. If the hermit is a crafter, the tools needed can run the gamut from a potter's wheel to a digital camera, from a loom which is usually pretty large, to a skill saw, knitting machines and computers often turn up in hermitages. And once a hermit has developed their skills and has a supply of saleable items, the next thing that raises the question is the vexing idea of how to sell them.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to make them known? Publicity.
Sales and marketing are definitely not the preferred way of living for, I would say, 99% of hermits.
No. And this is where another tool, the computer, can come in. We know now that thanks to the World Wide Web, items that you make within your hermitage can be advertised and sold and practically delivered online. So a computer can be a very useful tool to have, as well as one that you will use with appropriate care. A valuable piece of advice is always to remember that if you're working for your living, you will probably spend more time on your work schedule than you will on your prayer schedule. That doesn't mean that work is more important. The way that most hermits do it is they give their best hours to prayer. For some people, it's the morning hours. Other people, it is the evening hours when they're relaxed and quiet and the day's work is done. Then they can devote themselves with a free heart and spirit to their purpose. And gradually, over the years, prayer and work merge into just an endless and quiet rhythm. One final consideration about furnishings in a hermitage are those that deal with communication. Should a hermit have a phone? Should a hermit be attached to the web? A number of our readers, we discussed these questions in Raven's Bread, and a number of our readers gave us some intriguing ways to keep a phone and yet not let it intrude on their life. One female hermit said that she just made it known that she would never answer the phone except in the evening. Or another one said that she had an answering machine which took messages and had the ringer turned so low that it did not intrude on her day, and she was free to answer when it was comfortable. If a call was urgent, it was made known and she would respond. But the major value of having a phone, in my opinion, and Paul's too, is if you're living at a distance from other people and something happens, you have
emergencies.
You have a means of getting in touch quickly. You cannot always count on someone dropping in just at the moment you're going to need them. In the U.S., all you have to do is pick up your phone and dial 911, and emergency personnel are at your door very shortly. But speaking further on the value of phones, many hermits will use a phone for ministry because they have found over the years that doing spiritual guidance by phone is possible and sometimes really the only way.
And it's also a lot less disruptive to one's solitude.
Yes, you don't have people coming in and leaving at all hours. And you're also able to have more control over the amount of time you spend with them. Others establish websites on which they will offer prayers, spiritual reflections, book reviews that will be helpful to hermits or other people. And They even established chat rooms where they will respond when it is convenient for them. The phone connection.
On a deeper level, the quote-unquote phone connection that probably means most for hermits is something that we could compare to the old-fashioned party line. Remember those phones when you pretty much could assume that when you were on the phone with somebody, perhaps a curious neighbor was listening in on that phone call?
Well, not everybody could remember that far back.
I'm sure maybe one or two of our listeners can remember that far back. But today, when someone calls a hermit, they too know that there is another listener that is silently present between the hermit and the person that is calling. And the hermit also tunes in to that silent listener, not out of curiosity, but out of genuine concern. Sometimes we're prompted to offer words of advice and encouragement, or of some insight, or perhaps some caution that we wish to offer. And in those instances, we become the voice. The hermit becomes the voice of that unseen listener. Our job in that case is quite simply to keep the lines of communication open. Nothing more, nothing less. And in a similar vein, the hermits also serve as towers, so to speak, that pick up signals and direct those signals to their ultimate destination. Most of the time, the solitary is totally unaware of being used in this manner. Only on rare occasions are they asked to be intentional, conscious intermediaries. Throughout the day, their quiet routine, hermits focus on the spiritual realm and they bring it closer to the natural secular world. Through their hidden lives of sacrifice and attentiveness to the holy, hermits help to create more of those thin places that abound in Celtic lore, where the walls, the separations between this world and the other world are far more available and accessible, and that spiritual realm can more freely touch human lives.
And speaking of bringing the spiritual realm closer, we would like, as we have every time, would like to share a prayer period with you. I'd like to say that this has been a very special experience for us. And if it sounds like we're doing this for you, I want you to know that sharing prayer with you has enriched us over the months. And we hope that the same is true for you. We would like to bless this prayer time in the name of the one who creates all life, in the name of our Savior who loves our life, and in the name of the Spirit who is the fire of life. This time, I will ask you again to come with me on a guided imagery. First of all, it's important that we relax. Kick off your shoes if you're at a place where that's possible. Lean back. Breathe deeply. Allow yourself to take time. Even dim the lights around you if that's available to you. If thoughts come as your breathing goes in and out quietly, acknowledge them, but let them go. Just pay attention to your breathing. Imagine yourself out on the countryside on a bright day in May. The sky is a beautiful deep blue. Puffy clouds are scudding across it, and there is a cool, refreshing breeze. You are very comfortable. Although you are alone in the country, you are enjoying your own company. There is a dirt road near you, one with grass and weeds along both sides, and you decide to start walking along the road. As you walk, you are aware of the noises of insects, small animals rustling, and the birds chirping around you. Continue your walk. There is a bend in the road up ahead of you. When you go around it, you see, a little further on, a child sitting under a tree. Walk toward that child. As you get closer, you become aware that that child is you. The child under the tree is you at about age 5 or 6. Go to the child and greet your 6-year-old self. Your child self looks up at you and asks, "How did I get to be you?" Answer your child self. Respond. Then your child self asks another question. Will it always be like this? How do you respond? Not satisfied entirely, your child self probes you still further. What might be different, you are asked. Yes, what might be different? What do you suggest to your 6-year-old self? Slowly bring this conversation to a close. The time to leave is at hand. Say goodbye to your little child self. Leave the child now. Start walking down the road you first took. Go around the bend and come back to where you started. Hello, friends. We hope we're with you again. We had a nature intervened here. We're sorry about that.
Mother Nature is still in charge. We'd like to simply conclude before there are any other natural events with a simple reflection that takes us again to the Hebrew Scriptures with Psalm 139. You have searched me and known me, O God. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You see my path and my lying down, and are familiar with all my ways. You enfold me before and behind, above and beneath. Even before a word is on my lips, you know it completely. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so great that I cannot grasp it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning to the farthest limits of the sea, Even there your hand shall guide me, and your arm shall hold me close. If I say, let the daylight become night, so that darkness may cover me, even the veil of night will not hide me, for darkness is as light to you. It was you, Most Holy One, who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. In your book were written the days that were formed for me, even when none of them existed. I sleep and I wake. I am born and I die, and always I am still with you. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there is any wickedness in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And now, for just a moment, either in silence or in whatever way our hearts are moved, wherever you are, let's take time to give thanks for the day that has been and pray for peace, for the life of our world. You know what is within us, O God. You know the beauty and the falseness of our hearts. You know the heights and the depths of the human spirit. Lead us this night further into the universe of our souls, that we may know the wisdom and strength that you have placed within us. Lead us further into the mystery of our souls, that we may be strong and wise for the well-being of our world. Thank you again for joining with us this evening. We really appreciate this time of sharing with you all. We apologize for the natural interruption that sends my limited techie brain just wondering what to do next. If any of you would like to respond to the guided imagery this evening, you can get in touch with us through email, pkfredette@frontier.com. No spaces, all lowercase. Or you can go to the website, ravensbreadministries.com, and look up the contact page, contact us, and send us a message there. We'll be happy to share it. We'll respect your wishes with regard to anonymity or whatever. Of course, we will do that. But we'd happy to just receive your comments, but also if you would like to, we'll share them with the rest of the viewers at the next opportunity. Again, we thank everyone for being with us, and a special gratefulness to Brother Sean, to David, to Kedar, all those who have helped us to make these presentations possible. We look forward to being with you again next week. Good night, and God bless you. The blessings of heaven, the blessings of earth, the blessings of sea and sky, on those we love this night, and on every human family, the gifts of heaven, the gifts of earth, the gifts of sea and sky.